This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Tuesday afternoon. It's January 16th. We have Chris Hine from the Star Tribune here with us today. And amongst other things, I'm sure we'll get into, I want to talk a little bit about the Wolves defense at the halfway point. I know it's like, we talked about the defense so much. We are just about 41 games into the season, and the Wolves are the number one defense by a mile. And I think that in and of itself is something to dig into a little bit more, how dominant they've been compared to the rest of the league. Chris also wrote a good piece on Anthony Edwards' free throw volume going up. Talked to Ant about it. Talked to Chris Finch about it. Talked to Chris Hines. Ant's
with an S.
With an S. It's very confusing when I'm reading those.
Yes.
Or probably more confusing for others when they're reading those. I do want to talk about that. I knew you were working on that piece, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been kind of holding off on even mentioning that Ant's free throw volume is up as much as it has been. And I also kind of wanted to see if it would stay. So we'll get into that. And then Chris and I have done, honestly, a lot of talk with Chris in particular about how difficult that schedule stretch in the schedule was the previous month, because Chris was on the road traveling with them, feeling some of the pains of travel himself, but also, noticing things in the locker room as well, of, showing some fatigue or whatever. It really switches on a dime here. And I don't know, this upcoming stretch is significantly easier, which kind of comes with its own questions, in and of itself there. But Chris, you are in Detroit. How's Detroit? How are you?
Detroit is just as cold as Minneapolis is, and the water's freezing over, and I do see Lions jerseys everywhere. Man. On the statues downtown here and things like that.
That's cool.
It's football fever here in Detroit.
I got a Prize Picks ad spot I got to get to later, which I'm saving asking you about how you feel about the 49ers matchup against the Packers for, but I literally have 49ers ones picked out. So I'm going to,
Can't wait to dive into that.
Yes, actually. But let's start by talking about the Wolves defense before we hit record. We were talking about this a little bit too. I started doing the thing like, all right, 39 games into the season, we're about at the halfway point. Just started looking at some of that stuff. Where are they in the key markers? And I don't know if I just hadn't really noticed what number 2 was in defense in a while. Like, hadn't looked at the number of what number 2 was. But the Wolves defensive rating, which is points allowed per 100 possessions, the kind of the best way to rank defenses that we have. Their defensive rating is 108.8. And normally in all these ratings, Chris, as you know, it's like the team right behind the team who's in first is like 0.3 behind them. That's how it normally looks. And you're still like, yeah, hey, they're the best. They're number one. The Wolves are at 108.8 and the Celtics are at 111.8. That is a 3 points per 100 possessions difference.
Yep.
Which is massive. And if you're not somebody, not you, I know you are, but listening, who doesn't follow like this stuff closely, that is massive. And huge. I think that's a topic, Chris. Like, this hasn't just been the number one defense in the NBA. This has been the most dominant defense in the NBA by a wide margin. And obviously they're coming off that Clippers game, which is one of the best or better defensive performances of the year. And it makes you think about like, okay, why? We know the Gobert element of this elevates your defense to top 10 status, right? But what is making them not just number one, but number one with some separation there?
Number one with a bullet, as we say in the chart watching world.
That's interesting though, right? Yes. How big that gap is. We should be giving that more credit.
Just looking at that, like the gap between the Wolves and Boston is the same as the gap between like Boston and I think the team just
the
looking
Lakers.
at it here, like
the Lakers at 14th.
We're 14th, right?
Yep.
So it's the difference between 2 and 14. That's the difference between 1 and 2. And you're using the cleaning the glass numbers, which factors out garbage time.
Yeah.
So these are the minutes that matter. Look, I think obviously we've talked a lot about Rudy. We've talked a lot about his willingness to guard the perimeter. You and Britt handled that pretty well on Monday as it related to the Clippers game. To me, it's all the other things that are outside of the half court defense. Rebounding is related to the half court defense, but like they're better in transition. I mean, and they're better at rebounding this year.
Yep.
And those two things improved. They're not excelling, but they're better than they were a year ago. And because of that, they're able to get into half court defense more often. They are ending more possessions after one miss. Yep. You put all that together, and if that's the number, and that's what you come up with, because they are so much better. That, the defensive rebounding percentage, which is always the number I've harped on with this team for the last 2 years, as regular listeners will know, I bring it up often. They're currently 9th in defensive rebounding percentage. That's really good, especially compared to where they were the last couple of years here, specifically last year. So everything else, all the other little ancillary things, ways that teams could hurt them outside of the half-court defense, which is getting second shots, getting out in transition for easy buckets, they have really limited and really worked on. And once you get into a half-court setting with these guys, I like their chances against anybody in the league, really.
Elite, dude.
Yeah, 100%.
The average half-court defensive rating in the NBA is 99.0, which means about a point scored per possession, right?
Yeah.
The Wolves defensive rating when it is in the half court and it's not transition is 91.9. And they play in the half court often because they keep teams out of transition, which, again, what were we talking about at this point last year, right? Oh my gosh, transition.
They're getting run off the floor. They can't rebound. Yep.
It was in the minutes when Towns and Gobert were on the floor together last season, which was limited to 28 games or whatever it was. They were allowing transition opportunities at the equivalent of the second highest frequency. It was like at the level of Detroit and like Utah, actually really big teams. Yeah. And you're like, okay, I guess this kind of makes sense. Like this is par for the course. If you go with two slower bigs, like you just get run in transition a little bit. That was such a theme last year. And, to be honest, I feel like we haven't talked enough about how much less that is happening. They allowed the fourth fewest have allowed transition at the fourth lowest frequency in the NBA this season, while having Towns and Gobert on the floor for 20 minutes a night together.
Right.
And doing that, I mean, that is a massive accomplishment or a massive change from this year or from last season to this season to make, to make that number be as low. It's 13.5% of possessions that they are allowing opponents to get out in transition. Last year, the team that allowed transition opportunities at the lowest rate in the league was Oklahoma City, and they were at 13.5%. That is to go from when you got Cat and Gobert being the team that gets run more than almost anyone in the league to now being the team that is doing it at an elite level. And I looked it up. It's not like the Cat and Rudy lineups get run. They're 13.6, and the team as a whole is 13.5. Yeah. Teams get out in transition at the same low rate if Cat and Rudy are on the floor, or if they're not. One of them are, both of them are off, whatever. It's all the same. They don't allow it to happen. Chris Finch has intimated to us that Corliss Williamson, the addition to the Wolves coaching staff this season, was hired, and his main two areas of focus, in addition to working with Carl individually, are transition, getting back in transition defense and defensive rebounding. And I not to give 100% of that credit to Corliss Williamson, but to give credit to the organization for recognizing that as a weakness, Tim Conley, Chris Finch, whoever, and being like, we need to get a guy that we can trust, can get that message across. And I don't know, we don't see that message, how that works with Corliss Williamson, but we know as a point of emphasis, we know he's been working with the bigs, and the bigs and the team as a whole have been playing transition defense and rebounding at a significantly higher clip. And that's the gap. That's the gap.
Yeah.
That's why it's 108.8 versus
Correct.
111.8. So for sure, credit due there.
And it's not like, we've heard Finch talk a lot about, well, we need to do the things that big teams should do. And one of those things is crashing the offensive glass. They're not rebounding offensively at like a high rate. They're still like in the 20s overall in terms of offensive rebounding percentage. So they're not like getting a high volume of their misses on the offensive end. So to me, it's maybe there is a little bit of that where they are at least maybe making an effort to crash a little more. But honestly, to me, it's just being more intentional about getting back and making sure, somebody's got the ball, somebody's, enough guys are back to just prevent all this from happening and force teams into a half court setting. As for the rebounding, the defensive rebounding itself, just anecdotally from watching, they still don't really box out as much as like you would like them to. You still see like times where like, a Terrence Mann comes flying in and grabs an offensive rebound. It's like, what the hell? Like, why didn't anybody put a body on him? That still happens a couple times a game, maybe more than it should. But overall, I especially think you see it from Ant. Ant's really, I think, made an effort to get up and get more rebounds. Rudy's having a great rebounding year. I think Carl is having a really good rebounding year. He may not be having the numbers as when Rudy wasn't here, but I feel like Carl's done a really good I feel like Carl's done a really good job this year of rebounding, or at least occupying space to allow others to maybe get a rebound because he's in there as well. So I think overall they're doing a good job team rebounding, no matter who's getting it. And I think it's paying dividends. Like those were the areas that you could point to and say, if we just clean this up. They knew they were good in the half court defense last year.
They were. That
much they knew. That's why they were 10th overall. But you just improve on on these margins a little bit, and look what happens. It's not a huge mystery why they're number one in defense right now. Everything's just kind of coming together, whether it be Rudy feeling better physically, feeling more comfortable in their scheme, Carl guarding as well as he can in this scheme. Jaden's back and seemingly playing like he normally does. Like, it's all just kind of come together, and they've made those improvements. So yes, number one defense in the league by a healthy margin. Yeah.
It's interesting when you bring up the offensive rebounds. We don't have to go too far into this, but you wonder if you look at these numbers, if you're Chris Finch or the Wolves coaching staff, and you go, all right, we're actually getting back pretty good.
Yeah.
Halfway through the season, like, do we start sending more to the offensive glass? Because that's a way to juice the offense a little bit when you're like, this is only one side of the page when you're looking at the numbers at the halfway point of the season. The other side of the page is like, you're still a below average offensive team, and we know they're trying to find different ways to, boost that up, as we'll talk about with getting to the free throw line and some other things that they've been doing. That would be a way. It would be a little bit of a risk, right? Like, do you send, because it's normally Rudy, like Carl's in there. He's going to the offensive glass. Do you start sending Carl? Do you start
Rudy's in there? Rudy's pretty much in there regardless.
Yeah.
Like Rudy's always going to be trying to offensive rebound. It's just a matter of who else is in there as well. And usually Carl is in there. I don't think they usually send three. Like that's it's usually kind of just Rudy and maybe Carl. And then the other three are concentrating on getting back, which is fine.
And it's working.
Because it's working. Right.
Yeah. And like, I don't want to do the thing where I'm like, well, now after we were like, no, transition defense, and be like, no, now let that go to go get more offensive rebounds. But I'm sure that's something they're weighing. I think Finch has alluded to that a few times when we've talked about like matchup specific, going to the glass a little bit more offensively. We'll see. I think it's an option, an opportunity to get a little bit more offense comes with a little bit of risk. The other thing, I just rewatching some of the Clippers game, I was like, all right, this is good. Right? You're like, this is good defense. The shots are all difficult to take.
Right.
What is it? what is it? Why does this Clippers game feel like some of those dominant defensive performances at the beginning of the season? And I was thinking about that and just like watching the clips of the defense, when they are attached, when they stay attached, like so much of the defense is Rudy, but if you can stay attached to your man around a screen, under a screen, whatever the in transition matching up to your man, can you stay attached to your man so as when it gets to Rudy, you're filtering it there? And I think when the defense is lapsed this season, which hasn't done that much, but there's just been a little bit more of that separation. And I'm rewatching the clips from Harden attacks, Kawhi, Paul George, whatever, and Kyle Anderson, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, Nickeil Alexander-Walker are staying attached. And I think that's hard, right? It's a hard thing to do for 48 minutes. But when you don't, it can't. Yeah, Rudy's still there, but it becomes a different proposition for Rudy. Like Rudy can get up to block those mid-range shots when he knows Kyle Anderson is there on the guy's hip or like right in that rear view mirror.
You don't want to give the ball handler more room to operate in and around Rudy. Like, and
they're just that's when they're elite. They're doing that, and it's really encouraging to be like. Actually, when I think about that happening, I think about it happening against the Celtics. I think about it happening against the Clippers. I think about that first Oklahoma City matchup. Felt a lot like that. So it's not like this pursuit and this staying attachedness is a product of the opponent being mediocre or bad. It's they can and have shown that they can do this against great offenses in the regular season, which doesn't guarantee that they can do it in the playoffs. But it helps you believe that they can. And just watching that and being like, there isn't really like a guy, if they swing and now it's in Paul George and he has so-and-so guarding him, you're not super concerned about it. And I think that's a credit to guys like Ant kind of turning that up a little bit more. Jaden maintaining, Nickeil maintaining, Kyle Anderson always being good at that. And even some of the, fringe guys like Jordan McLaughlin-Small, he stays attached. Like you see that from even Shake and Troy Brown at times. Like they have a group where their wing and perimeter defenders can do that. And it starts there in unlocking Rudy to be super special. And that's what I think that the difference is. That's what makes them great. X and O's.
100%. You and Britt again covered it yesterday. It's like the ISO teams. This team tends to thrive more against ISO teams because guys like Ant and Jaden are so good defending on ball and take a lot of pride in those kind of one-on-one matchups. And when they know they have Rudy back there, as long as they just do a decent job of staying with their man, they know that Rudy is going to be there to help them and kind of clean up the rest of the way. The other thing that I think is really good just watching this team on a night-to-night basis is their ability to close out. That's just something that I think I've come to appreciate about this team. When they close out, they are not just flying by and contesting, and the guy just has to reset and takes an open three. They are executing the hard closeouts where they close out hand in the face, but maintaining position in front, not allowing an open shot, but also not allowing the drive either. Like I think this team closes out at a very good to elite level. And it's rare when you see a flyby contest that just delays somebody's shot. When they did the fly around 2 years ago in the high wall, it felt like that was a lot of the contests were just kind of flyby. And that's why they allowed, a decent number of open threes. Now I think they make a concerted effort to do the hard closeouts to make sure that these guys are not getting open looks or open lanes to drive to the basket. And that's a hard thing to do. That requires a lot of effort, requires a lot of focus and energy. Like it's easy. It's easy defense to just be like, all right, I'm just going to run out at this guy, hand up and just fly by him and whatever he does afterwards, whatever. I did my job there, but they're coming out, they're putting the brakes on and getting a hand up. And they're doing it the hard way. And I think that's one thing that if you watch this team on a nightly basis, I think you'll come to appreciate is just how well they close out.
Yeah, no, that was, I had written down staying attached and helping the helper.
Mhm.
But it's closeouts too. So I would say like if we're looking defensively outside of Rudy, and Rudy's part of the helper thing, but like staying attached defensively, can you help when help is needed and know that help is coming for your man? And when the time comes to X out to get out to the perimeter
Mhm.
and do so, can you contest under control?
Yeah.
Fly there, kind of understanding when am I flying here to just get the contest off and when am I actually closing out? When they're playing their best defense, they're finding all three of those things and they're finding that last one kind of in at the right, I guess, rate. Chris, let's grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. They already have an NFL slate up for this weekend. PrizePicks.com, Prize Picks app, promo code Dane for $100 sign up bonus. First, I just want to ask you, how do you feel about your 49ers? Green Bay as a matchup.
Tricky matchup. I think it's going to be high scoring. Green Bay's offense the last like 2 months of the season is like number 2 in all these advanced metrics, only to San Francisco's offense. So I think it's going to be a lot of points. So I would maybe pound the over on a lot of these things.
So give me one of these that you like the best. Brock Purdy, 264.5 passing yards, more or less than that. Brandon Ayuk, 69.5 receiving yards, more or less than that. George Kittle, 52.5 receiving yards, more or less than that. Deebo Samuel, 58.5 receiving yards, more or less than that. And then Christian McCaffrey's rushing plus receiving yards, so total yards.
I like McCaffrey.
125.5. That's a high number, though, right?
Listen, I read a thing today about how Green Bay is like the worst in the league at covering running backs catching the ball.
Interesting.
So and who's better to beat that than Christian McCaffrey? So I like as high as that number may seem, I think that's probably a good bet to go over 125 on that.
Would you say, though, so his receiving yards number is 32.5 and his rushing yards number is 88.5?
Well, I'd probably go over on the receiving
yards. Okay.
I'd probably go over on the receiving.
Okay.
I kind of like the Ayuk number. I mean, he is their receiving yards leader and hitting 70 in a game like this where Dallas does not have Green Bay does not have a good defense. I would feel pretty good about that one. Deebo, you never know.
Yeah, I was
like the receiving and the run. Like Deebo may end up with like an 80-yard touchdown in this game, but it could be on a jet sweep and it's rushing yards and not receiving. Brandon Ayuk, every time he touches the ball, it's going to be a catch.
Right.
I'd probably go over on the McCaffrey receiving and maybe over on the Ayuk receiving yards. George Kittle's more hit or miss. Like, you never know how heavily involved George Kittle is going to be.
Maddening. 3 touchdowns 1 week, 1 catch for 4 yards the next week.
100%. But I have a feeling they're going to be throwing to McCaffrey a lot.
Okay.
And Ayuk has been their most consistent pass catcher all season. So those would be my 2 recommendations there.
So we'll say Ayuk more than 69.5 receiving, McCaffrey more than 32.5 receiving. And I don't know, I guess if somebody you want to get on that and you want to add a third leg to it, you think there's going to be a lot of receiving guys, you might take Purdy over 264.5 there too.
That's always tricky. I mean, if San Francisco gets up in the second half and they're just running the ball at that point in the game and they're like that. Oh,
so now you're predicting a blowout.
It's within the range of outcomes. Okay. Like if we're talking a range of outcomes here, I don't see Green Bay blowing the Niners out. Green Bay could win a close game, but I think a Niners blowout is within the realm of possibility.
Okay.
So those are my range of outcomes for this game on Saturday.
Well, we went directly to the source of 49ers fandom for a Saturday slate. Oh, yeah. How about that?
Yeah.
Packers, Saturday. Niners at the same time as Wolves, Thunder.
I may have scheduled that game off for myself to watch.
You skipping Wolves, Thunder?
Because I knew that it was NFL playoff weekend. Okay. So I always listen. There's no way I would be doing my best work anyway if I was like covering the Wolves game while like the Niners were.
You would not.
Be so.
I can vouch for that. You would not do a good job.
Correct. Yeah. So it's just better for all involved that I take that game off. So yeah, I will not be covering Saturday's game.
We'll get Zagota back on the beat.
Jerry will be there on Saturday. Yep.
All right, let's continue talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yes.
When we were both on the road together on the last road trip, I could tell you were kind of starting to work on this Ant free throw story. You were asking Finch and some of the other coaches and players about what is a pretty like noticeable change in the Wolves offense. Is Anthony Edwards getting to the basket more often and getting to the free throw line more often? Again, as we're talking about these small little areas like we were with the offensive rebounding, what can they do a little bit more of to get 2% better on offense? And this actually would be driving the offensive rating up had the turnover thing not kind of simultaneously kicked in at the same time.
Yeah.
But like we're smart enough to be able to compartmentalize some things and understand that like, hey, it is getting to the free throw line a lot more this season, particularly of late, and that is having a positive impact on the Wolves offense, even if it isn't like globally being captured because some other things have gotten worse. I think this was a good story idea and something to dig into. I guess kind of give me like the genesis of the story idea, if it's anything more than just noticing like, hey, that's 10 free throws again.
What did you exactly learn? It's like, okay, so it's like, okay, Ant is getting to the free throw line more. We know that. So what I wanted to do was just try and say why or how is that happening? What is he doing differently, if anything, that is getting him to the line more often? So I spoke to Chris Hines, the Wolves assistant coach, who has worked with Ant kind of as his player development coach for the last 3 seasons. And, you know, they talked a lot in the offseason about making this happen, that their goal was like 7-8 free throws a game. They're inching towards that. I think they're in the mid 6s, you know, per game.
After a slow start, where it was like 5 or something.
Yeah, I mean, there was and I put this in the story, there was a run there where he was getting to the line double-digit times, like 6 or 7 straight games, something like that. So it's all in how Ant is handling and reacting to contact. You know, as Chris kind of put it to me, like in previous years, Ant was kind of, when he would go to the basket, kind of holding the ball kind of close. And that does not allow referees to kind of see the hacking on the arms. Sure. But the more he brings it out a little bit, the more you can kind of see the hits on the arm. Yeah. So that's been one adjustment they've made, is just bringing the ball out a little more as he's driving to the basket.
Can I ask you a question off of that? I mean, I think all of us who have been watching have seen a lot of like Ant getting into a crowd and the ball kind of shooting out of there, sort of, which I'm noticing the arms extending some too. And it clearly is leading to more foul calls as we're seeing the numbers go up. I would guess that like exposing the ball a little bit more
leads to another turnover or two.
Yeah. Or even just like the ball being slipped or stripped. Like there was, I get like, it's hard to get hacked if Ant's keeping the ball close to his chest, but then it's a little bit more like running back style, you know, where you got it like tucked. I don't know, like what's the trade-off there? I think it's given how high the free throw numbers have been. I think in the aggregate, it's a good thing. Maybe in time, getting more comfortable, used to it, he learns how to kind of protect it even in that extension a little bit more.
Right.
But I think 2 things are happening from that.
I think that's fair. The other thing, and to your running back kind of mentality, the other thing that he's doing is it's how he reacts to contact, and that is the phrase that Chris Hines used was he's to submit to the contact. Before, because he has a background of being a running back in youth football growing up, he's trying to, you know, he would take the contact and try to fight through it. And as we know from covering Carl all these years, when you try to fight through the contact a lot, you're not going to get the calls as much as you try to fight through it, because it looks like you're not being disadvantaged in your ability to score.
Particularly when you're the bigger one, right?
Like the bigger guy, right?
And Carl is that, like, I think Carl gets less calls or like quote unquote a bad whistle. In part because he's 6'11", driving on a 6'7" dude, you know.
Correct. And so it doesn't look like they're impeding your progress to the basket.
And Ant doesn't really look like it too, because he's not huge like in height or anything, but he's forceful,
strong,
you know, and there's a psychological element to that, I think, as a ref.
So it's not to say that Ant is like flopping more or like exaggerating the contact, but maybe he is a little bit. You watching Ant on a night-to-night basis, watching Ant on a night-to-night basis, you're not going to say Ant flops, but maybe he is just trying to draw more attention to the contact. We obviously know he does so audibly with the hay every night. But I think in his motions, he's trying to do that a little bit more, trying to get out of that football player mentality a little bit. And, you know, maybe also just overall, him getting more calls, if this is going to be happening, maybe it just encourages him then more to want to drive to the basket, which is what he does best and what this offense needs.
True.
So, and that's not always an easy thing to do. It's mentally draining throughout the course of a game and physically draining. Like it's a hard thing to do. But if this encourages him more, if he's getting better results in terms of getting to the free throw line, maybe it does encourage him more to keep wanting to do it.
Yeah.
As opposed to it being kind of a fruitless endeavor if he goes in there, gets hacked, and doesn't get a whistle.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's proving to be fruitful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's like, I don't think of Ant like as super floppy.
No.
I do think of Ant as a complainer.
Yes.
So
100%.
To that end, he's like more Luka and less Embiid, you know, like, I don't know. Both of those could be like a tough watch at times, but it does, like, it comes with the territory of like these star players. It is this big advantage to be able to get in the lane and draw that contact there. And I think it's as long as the game is called this way, it's like a necessary thing for the Wolves to be emphasizing. And that's the real achievement of this thus far, right? Is this was a clear point of emphasis that Finch, Ant, whoever told us back on media day in September was like, Ant's free throws need to go up. Ant said, my free throws need to go up. He said it numerous times. It's taken some time, but I think a reasonable amount of time, you know, the first 25 games or so for him to kind of understand and learn how and where he can best get those. And I think, as we mentioned, the turnovers and stuff like that, I think there's some things that can be trimmed, kind of shaved down, right? Like that make this an even more and more profitable endeavor, because while he's neither as floppy as Embiid or as whiny as Doncic, he's not getting as much of a boost for free throw generation as both of those guys are. So it's an interesting thing to track. I mean, I've been saying all year, I don't anticipate this team to stay where they are defensively. Or sorry, offensively. Offensively. Yeah. And I think it's going to go up. And it's going to go up based on how many of these things that they hit, right? And one of them is free throw generation, specifically from Ant. And can you stack that on top of maybe getting some more offensive rebounds, on top of turning the ball over a little bit less? Like, even when the Wolves have, if it's February or something, and we're like, whoa, Wolves are number 3 in offense this month, we are going to be able to point to these things happening and making a difference. And to that end, I think this is that it's starting to come together, even if it's being shaded over by the turnovers right now. Like the breadcrumbs have been laid down in December and early January that like Ant getting the line is coming.
Yeah, this is all kind of part of that process, right? It's if you're changing your style, if you're trying to tweak your game a little bit, there's going to be a few bumps in the road, and maybe that's what the turnovers are. And he gets lost a little bit in there when he's trying to pass out of it sometimes. So that's a big part of the turnovers too. How many times we see him go into a crowd, pass out of it, especially that opposite corner pass that just sometimes sails over the guy's head out of bounds. Feels like you can put him down for 1 or 2 of those per game. But I think this is all part of the process. And it's all about, figuring it out with the refs, figuring it out,
but like it's just like a time thing. It's like figuring this stuff out takes time. I don't think
and
either
it
of us
takes reps and it takes
him.
games, right? No, he's well intentioned with this. Like this is, this is as the Wolves will say, this is his superpower on offense. Right. Ant has always kind of prided himself on being a very good all-around offensive player, and I feel like he gets insulted when you just say to him that he's just great at going to the basket but not a great shooter. He gets kind of ticked off by that. But at the end of the day, as good of a shooter as he's become, this is what he does best.
It's a superpower. That's it. You're right.
And this is how this offense is going to operate at its peak powers, whether it's him getting fouled, whether it's him taking it to the basket, drawing a crowd and kicking out to somebody who's open. This is where their offense does the best. Now it's more than just like, as we've noticed, this offense can't just be Ant is dribbling at the perimeter, goes off a screen, takes it to the hole. Like there's got to be ball movement. There's got to be rhythm, because the more you can get Ant going downhill, in the flow of the offense, the better it is for the offense, as opposed to him just trying to generate this on his own, which is, what I feel like happens a lot. But the more you can kind of swing past, and then Ant's getting it on the wing and somebody's coming over, but they're not in position, and he can just dribble right by them, and all of a sudden he's in the lane, one dribble. Like that to me is where this offense really starts humming.
Yeah, that's his finishing move, right? Like if that's his superpower, that's the finishing move, is against a shifted defense, one-on-one situation, I'm scoring.
Yeah.
Or you're fouling me on my way to get scored.
100%.
Speaking of free throws, is kind of weird transition, but me and Britt didn't talk about Rudy and the free throws like at all yesterday after the Clippers game, which that was a part of the story of that game. Obviously, Rudy started off really poorly from the free throw line and didn't make the critical ones at the end. But we've seen games like this where it's like, okay, you look over at the monitor and it's like 1 for 5 from the line for Gobert. It's not consistent. This isn't like an every game sort of thing, which leads me to like ask the question to like, how much of a deal even is this? That was one of the first games where we've seen a team do the Hack-A-Rudy thing, where they're just fouling him and putting him to the line to take 2 free throws, just to kind of kill the offense's rhythm, and also to believe that he's not going to consistently be making them. I haven't really like internalized this as like a huge issue or fear comes.
It hasn't cost them yet. It hasn't.
Right. Like, we're at that point, right? We're not freaking out about this yet, are we?
No, we're not, because he still hits them at a decent enough rate.
It's like 63%
to prevent this from being a real problem. I do wonder about the playoffs, especially maybe in a road atmosphere. If that's a little different. Like, I think one of the things that really helped on Sunday night, and you could say that this doesn't matter, but the crowd really getting behind him, his teammates like Ant, cheering him on, during some of those free throws, right? Like, I feel like that's a big psychological boost for somebody in that moment, where the crowd, maybe last year, if this is last year's team, that crowd has a lot more nervous energy in that moment, right? And it's like, oh boy, how is this going to go? But this year, the crowd, because of how well they played, is 100% behind him and cheering him on, encouraging him. His teammates are reacting the same way, where they're not like wondering the same thing, where it's like, oh boy, how's this going to go? So I think there's at home, there's a good mojo around those kind of moments. In a road playoff setting, I do wonder. We'll see. Right. Like, I honestly, I think it depends on a night to night basis. Like, if Rudy starts off a road playoff game and he's 5 of 6 at the line,
then he's fine.
A team is not going to do Hack-A-Rudy. I think the Clippers just pulled it out because he had missed so many early in the game. And I really think that's a night to night thing with him. It's not automatic that a team is just going to resort to this in the last 5 minutes. It really depends on how he's doing that particular night. And he has shown throughout the course of the season, this is never. I can't recall a close game where this has cost them.
Yeah.
So
I don't think so.
To his credit, he's come up big in the biggest moments. And even when they did the Hack-A-Rudy, like he hit the 4 late. They did it earlier too.
Well, they did it before the 3-minute mark.
Yeah,
before it becomes an intentional
before it becomes a thing. He hit 1 of 2 each time.
Yep, that's what I was going to say.
So they weren't complete. They weren't complete blanks on the possessions. Yeah.
And here's the thing: we were talking about this earlier. What is the average offense in a half-court situation? Not transition.
1 point per possession.
1 point per possession. So what is that? That's 1 of 2 at the free throw line.
Right.
Like, so even when a team fouls Rudy in a Hack-A-Rudy situation and he makes
ahead
1 of 2 of them, that becomes an average offensive possession,
right?
And now other things go against that. You do that 3-4 possessions in a row. Like, does Ant lose his rhythm? Do you there's some like psychological factor to that,
sure.
But strictly math, like if Rudy's a 63% free throw shooter, so the expected value of Rudy going to the free throw line is 1.26 points per possession. That would be the number 1 offensive rating in the league. That's better than what the Pacers do. And that's certainly a lot better than the 1 point per possession bar of typical half-court offense.
Right.
So I don't think Rudy is in the danger zone of that being a problem. It would need to be like 53% for me to be like, okay, like maybe we need to pull him in these situations because it's still like 1 point per possession, but now we're losing all the rhythm there. I think the expected value of Rudy going to the free throw line, even in the fourth quarter, when maybe he's going to miss some more of them because of pressure or something, it's still just like a push to me. I can't get to the point of being like, this is going to be a reason why he's off the floor in the playoffs, or if tomorrow night in Detroit, they start doing I think you just kind of can ride it out. Maybe and then what they did is they kind of wrote it out, and then they had Carl come. Carl came in at the 4-minute mark.
Yeah, there was a little gap where Rudy was off the floor,
and that was part of that was strategic to some extent.
Sure.
But you were also gonna pull Rudy at some point, probably to get a breather before crunch time.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess that's why I skipped over it yesterday. Because I'm not at the point of thinking it's a real issue. But it was a story from that game last night, and it's something for us to, keep in mind, because if there is another game where it happens, or if in that game he would have gone all 0 for 4 rather than 1 for 2 and 1 for 2.
Yeah,
it almost changes the game there. But
that's the thing. He's consistent enough in hitting these that it's avoiding becoming a problem. And listen, with the Wolves' late game offense and some of their games of late, getting 1 point on a possession is hell of a lot better than they've done recently, where they come up with empty possessions or turnovers.
For sure, it's crunch time. Offense, which does bog down and does the scoring goes down in those times.
If I'm the Wolves, I'm welcoming the chance for Rudy to get 1 of 2 free throws.
I'm kind of
they'll take their chances getting a stop at the other end. And then you've won those 2 possessions 1-0, and killed however many seconds off the clock. I don't see it as a problem. We'll see in the playoffs. Different set of circumstances, different energy, different environment.
We're aligned on road,
that. Right? Yes, but I think in the regular season, I just don't see it becoming a real issue.
Chris, let's move to the schedule ahead. I'm glad we don't need to talk about the 16-game Hell March or Death March or whatever you called it anymore.
Hell March.
It's done, man. I mean, this schedule ahead is easy. I was just going. This is just next 5, right? It's Detroit tomorrow night. You'll be there. Detroit is 3-36 this season. They're 28th on offense, 29th on defense. Memphis, the next game, they are 15-25, 29th on offense, 13th on defense. And now they're without Desmond Bane, in addition to, no John Morant and just a bunch of, Marcus Smart is hurt. Obviously, Steven Adams is out for the season. Brandon Clark has been out. A decimated Memphis team. So 15 and 25 and 29th on offense and 13th on defense probably even overrates what they are.
Right.
And in the middle of this is the outlier. It's the big one. It's the Wolves at home against Oklahoma City. They're 1-1 against them this year. A kind of convincing win and a kind of convincing loss in the other direction. That's a big game. Oklahoma City's 27 and 12. They actually have a better point differential than the Wolves. They're right on their heels.
I think Oklahoma City's on the tail end of a road trip there, so the Wolves might get them on a good night. They won't be a back-to-back, but I think it's the end of a 4-game road trip for them. That's currently in Los Angeles, so I think they'll be logging.
Kind of like
they'll be
logging
a few miles on this trip. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They are 4th on offense and 4th on defense. The last 2 are the Hornets and the Wizards. The Hornets are 8 and 29, 26th on offense, 28th on defense. And the Wizards are 7 and 32, 25th on offense and 30th on defense. So that means in the next 5 games, the Wolves play the 3 worst defensive teams in the league. And they also play the 25th, 26th, 28th, and 29th offense in the league this season. Outside of the Oklahoma City thing, you can't set up an easier 4 here, which some people are like, all right, I've already turned the podcast off. Like, okay, you jinxed it. But like, we were doing the other side of it before. We're like, this is really difficult stretch coming up. This is an easy one. I will say this, Chris, and this is what I really want to ask you. I'm not too scared about it anymore, man. I'm really like the Portland, Detroit shit from last year. Like it does.
It's over? Yeah.
I mean, it's not to say it can't happen. And like, didn't Boston lose to Charlotte earlier this season or something like that? Or went into overtime against Detroit? Like it can happen. You
should prepare yourselves for a night where things go haywire against a bad team. Like it probably will happen at some point.
At some point, if you run because the schedule is easy after these 5 games too. One of them, they're probably going to hit a snare and something, whatever. But when we were doing this last year, we were looking ahead and we were like, oh, Detroit, Houston, whatever. They don't come ready for that.
Right.
I don't have that anymore. I don't.
Correct.
I think we can move on from that, and they've earned that. I really do, and I think so much of that is the stability that Rudy Gobert provides. Ant and Carl do obviously a ton for this team too. I don't even know how I'd rank them impact wise on this team this year, but the Rudy element in this group with the level of defenders we were talking about before, there's just a stability that I feel more comfortable with in this team that doesn't lead me to fear or assume that some sort of letdown is going to happen against the Hornets on Monday night at home. Like it could happen. It just, I don't know. I don't think it should be the assumption at all.
It shouldn't be. And they've shown that time and time again. You look at all their losses this year, and outside of the 2 early in the season to Toronto and Atlanta, when they're kind of getting their legs under them for the season. I don't know that there's a game on the schedule where you can point to it and be like that going into the night, that should have been a win, or we lost to an inferior team or something like that. Right. It's like
the closest thing we can do is like, okay, like we played this team without their star players and you only beat them by 3, like one of the New Orleans games comes.
We
can't rip on that.
They won the game.
Yeah.
Or the Dallas game where Luka and Kyrie didn't play at home, and
too close.
It was like a weird game, but they still won.
Yeah.
So I kind of tweeted this out. This was before the Clippers game and after the Portland game.
Should you say the Portland game was Portland's one of these teams, and that was the least competitive basketball game I've seen in 7 years covering the Minnesota Timberwolves.
It was basically like a preseason game. It was essentially what that was. But after that game, I was just kind of looking at the schedule, and it's like, okay, they have 3 against Portland, 2 against Detroit, 2 against Washington, 2 against the Spurs, 2 against Memphis, and 1 against Charlotte. That's 12 games against the bottom 6 teams. And we love to talk about the bottom 6 teams of the league last year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now this year, this was before the Clippers game. Over a quarter of the remaining games of the schedule are against the bottom 6 teams in the league. If you go, and I then tweeted this, if you go 9-3 against those games, and there's every reason to think they could go 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 even. But if you just set a realistic benchmark of 9-3, and then you go 500 the rest of the way, you're at 52-30. And Denver got the 1 seed at 53-29 last year. So, it's the roadmap is there for the 1 seed, right? Like it's there. You play 500, and they got one in the win column against on the rest of the schedule portion the other night against the Clippers. So now you just have to go 11 and now you just have to go 1 game under 500 the rest of the way against the better competition. Mm-hmm. So 9-3 plus 1 game under 500 against the rest of the way, and you're at 52 wins for the season, and you're in there for the 1 seed. Mm-hmm. Do better, and you probably have the 1 seed. Yeah. Locked up, I'm guessing. I don't know.
And maybe the 1 seed will be a little higher than 52 this year.
Maybe it's more like 55, 56 because Oklahoma City and Denver are not going away. It might be, and Denver kind of struggled down the stretch last year in the regular season. But the roadmap to the mid 50s to potentially high 50s, if you can really go on a good run, is there. Like it is there. The 1 seed is very doable. That they acquitted themselves well enough during that 16 game stretch. Yes, you would have liked to have had that Boston game. And 1 or 2 others, the New York game, you would have liked to have had those, and there were some winnable games in there, but they did come out of it 9-7. They stayed atop the West during that stretch, and now it really is kind of set up for them to be the top seed if they can just play like they have for most of the season. It's there for the taking.
I like roadmap to the 1 seed. I might title this episode that. That's a good one. I do think, like, when I was looking at that, I'm like, okay, so like 4 of the next 5 are going to kind of be like that Portland game. Like, what am I looking for?
That's a good thing. That's a good thing for this team.
No. To
boring is a good thing.
To be clear.
Remember Carl said winning is boring or something like that?
Yes. No, people are not like that.
This is what they mean.
You're totally right. Great pushback, because somebody else would have said it to me. I just meant, like, selfishly how I'm like looking at it of like, okay, like, in all seriousness, like, we were really looking at that 16 game time of like a learning lesson. Or, that's why I said, that's why I did the end of the 16, that road trip, because I was like, I think I'm going to learn some things about this team at the end of a really difficult stretch on the season. So I'm trying to like do that for this next like pocket of time until the trade deadline. And what I was thinking about, I wouldn't be shocked if a player that plays for Detroit, Memphis, Charlotte, or Washington is on the Timberwolves in a month. That would not, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would probably bet that one of them, that's the team. I think those are going to be the sellers, man. Like,
sure.
Or 100%. The majority of them, 4 of the 6 or 8, if some other teams are. I think, particularly with like Washington, like they're open for business. They're in like stage 0 of like the Thunder stuff from like 5-6 years ago. If you want to go get somebody and you pay market price, you can go get them. Is that. And some people are going to be like, okay, Tyus Jones. But I would even say, like, look at some of the guys who, like, come off the bench, like Alec Burks from Detroit. If you're, for the real Wolves sickos who are going to be, like, watching the second half of Wolves Wizards when the Wolves are up by, like, 20. I'm like, I will honestly, or if I'm going to watch any of these teams' games before, like, I think that's an interesting thing to do, because we've done the thing, right, where it's like, what does this team need most? Backup point guard, movement shooter, bucket getter. Well, like you and I can have that conversation and have our opinions on it, but it also kind of matters is like, who is that backup point guard?
Yeah.
Who is that movement shooter? What are those players? So honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't watched a lot of Detroit, Memphis, Charlotte, or Washington in the past month. Good. But I have on my to-do list today. Washington and Detroit played Washington and Detroit played last night. I'm going to watch the game.
You're talking about other people being sickos.
No. I agree. I agree with it. It is. I always, what I've noticed since doing this job, and the Wolves have acquired a lot of players, right, since we've been covered this team. I always think I have an idea of what a player is before they get to Minnesota. And then I learn, even just like that, we do that like month-long sprint after the trade deadline of like trying to understand who Mike Conley is and what his game is. I mean, Mike Conley, dude, who amongst us would have thought Mike Conley could have been anything like what he was for this team? Because we didn't get it,
Right.
I remember even like Jeff Teague. I remember that back then. I'm like, I feel like I know what Jeff Teague's game is. And I'm like, you watch him play for a month and you don't. So I don't know. I found that stuff sort of fun. And I haven't done a lot of trade stuff or looked around. I think that's one small way to make a weaker spot in the schedule a little bit more interesting. But we will see what this team does. I don't know if it was the death march. What is this?
This is the soft
January?
landing. This is the
soft landing. Okay.
Soft landing. Yeah. From that hell march. Yeah.
And well deserved. Well deserved given how they played in that time. All right, Chris. What do you got? What are we working on this week?
We're covering games. Hopefully, trying to pick away at some features. We'll see if I can, get some stuff together, get what I need on them, and hopefully in coming weeks and months we'll have some good stuff for you, especially as we ramp up for the playoffs.
Trade deadline, playoffs, all that stuff. Yeah. There's a little bit more drilling down stuff here too. Well, enjoy the game in Detroit. You'll be back. Are you going to be back on Thursday for the?
I will be there Thursday. I'm covering Thursday's game. Yep.
Sweet. Well, I will see you there. You guys do check out that the Anthony Edwards article that we were referencing. That was in the Sunday paper, obviously still up on Star Tribune. You can find that on Chris's Twitter. I scrolled down about 7-8 tweets and found it this morning to read it. So check that out. I thought that was interesting. Good sort of perspective of being on the beat and having the opportunity to ask a bunch of different players about and people on the team about a trend is some of the best work Chris and the other beat guys do. So do check that out. Star Tribune, startribune.com. I will be back after the Detroit game late, Kyle, because it's a little bit earlier of a game. Kyle and I are going to go live right after that Detroit game. And that will be the next episode up in your feed. Until then, he's Chris. Follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. Till then, peace out. How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.